And we're working this out as we go along. What's so wonderful is not only do we have a real-time focus group out there that as brands we can tap into and do R&D or test an idea before we invest in it, but you know, as Ian was saying, it's almost like you've got to make a product first and then test it in the marketplace. From a political activist point of view, you've got to sort of create some semantic web widget and put it out there and see if it engages fundraising. You know, from a brand point of view, you've got to kind of put a technology out there or an application and see if it resonates with your audience. And we're in this large, seemingly tireless living lab where we're working out the balance between brands and consumers, between technology and emotion, between the status quo and social change. And I think if we characterize this period of change, if we compared it to the digital revolution in the early 90s, my guess is that we're like 3 o'clock on Monday in a week of change, in that we've just reached a point of sufficient adoption of social media that it's being taken seriously. We've just reached a point where it's being sufficiently integrated by brands that it's being taken seriously. We've just reached a point where there's enough brands of sufficient size executing large enough campaigns to create the data that justifies the formulas, which means that you can justify it in the boardroom so that people can say there's our ROI and therefore we're going to change behavior on that basis. So we need to steer that conversation, but I think our sense, I don't know if you guys agree, but the sense is there's heightened awareness on behalf of consumers, there's heightened sense of responsibility on behalf of many leading brands, and technology is potentially transformative.
My take is I think it could go in one of two ways. So we're at an important inflection point. It could be very positive, but to me the thing that's really important to that is that we look at the economic engine of these brands. Mm-hmm. So we don't just take a brand as a brand, right? So you could be Pepsi or you can be, the largest maker of wind turbines and you're on a level playing field. You're not, right? So if you're Pepsi, your net impact on the world is overwhelmingly negative. There's no way to get around it, right? Mm-hmm. You're making people fat and you're using a lot of water. It's just objectively true, right? And so your equation for how you do this, so you could do a great initiative like Pepsi Refresh, mm-hmm. but it's utterly marginal. And I would argue it's actually distracting people from the harmful economic impacts that Pepsi's doing. Yeah. And so a company like Pepsi, for me, should focus on internal transformation. So they have enormous assets. I think there's eternally some real impetus to do some serious transformation to their brand. Although there are going to be constraints being a public company, to really fundamentally transform their business model. So you sort of look at those guys and you say, well, the bar is very high, and you doing a bit of distracting cause marketing is not necessarily actually something that we need to encourage. And so if we want an avalanche of that, we could all be kind of dazzled by these beautiful cause marketing campaigns that are utterly marginal to the net impact these brands are actually having. Business. On the other hand, if we're doing it in such a way that we're helping to transform the economic engines of these companies in really profound ways, then they have some right to do some marketing off the back of that and to really champion those things. But I think what we want to avoid is a culture of peripheral, marginal, so that the bulk is bad, but we're going to do this one little thing on the side that's good. And so on the other hand, I think there are these brands that are basically engines of the transformation that we need in our society and our economy. The green companies, the companies that are making electric cars instead of cars powered by gas, etc. So those guys, I think, have a right to do all the damn marketing they want, and that we should encourage them. And so there's just that nuance needed about getting people to apply those different lenses without going into a place where you discourage the big brands from doing some of the transformation that they can and will do.
I think what Jeremy's saying is absolutely right. Everybody in this room has to make a choice. Do we want to demonize brands on the basis of certain negative impact they have? For example, as you say, Pepsi, many will say contributes to obesity because it makes brown sugared water. Or do we celebrate the good work that they're doing as permission slips for others? And the reason it could be any example, but what encourages me about Pepsi is that Indra Nooyi is somebody who, through performance with purpose, she has led the way in terms of executive leadership for the last 5 years. And they're doing the Pepsi Refresh project, but they're also doing recyclable packaging with sun chips. They're also doing the Dream Machine vending machines that go towards veterans. They're also contributing to the Refresh University for social entrepreneurship. So what interests me is when you have a leadership change and you have a holding company level change, then I think that should, in the context of no change at all, be applauded. And we need to celebrate those successes so that others feel like that there's a sea change going on in the community. But we cannot ever allow disingenuous or really ineffective cause marketing to pass as serious engagement or, you know, something that should really change our opinion of a brand.
If you look at some of the brands that are not Pepsi and that are doing it right,
Yeah.
you know, some of the smaller brands, and this is actually a question for you, how do they get the message out that there's so much noise? You can go on Twitter and you can put your message out, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be heard and you're going to be heard succinctly. So what would your advice be for maybe people out here even who are doing the right thing and would love to have their message heard?
I think it's not so much a social media issue or a technology issue as a branding issue. I don't know what you guys think, but often, almost to a fault, every brand struggles with self-definition in two terms. People don't know who they are, and secondly, they don't differentiate themselves from their competitors. And even if they do, they don't do it consistently, irrespective of whether it's on Twitter or Facebook or whether it's on a television ad. And invariably, as CMOs rotate out or as you switch through different advertising agencies, you're like a drug-addled teenager constantly going into rehab. You know, you need to make a commitment to who you are and let that be your compass rather than let the marketplace or your competitors or shiny new technology steer your choices. So I would suggest as a single proprietor, as a company of 10 people, really ask yourself why you're doing it and really define it in clear terms and distill it down to emotional language and then communicate that consistently across platforms that are appropriate to your audience, and then you will be ahead of 90% of the other companies out there, irrespective of social media.
You know, I agree. Smaller companies, even larger companies, what are our values? What do we stand for? Right. We see ill definition across so many sectors and so many industries. Those who do it well know who they are, they know what they're doing, and to your point, they're building it in, right? They're building the change into their core organizations and allowing that to ripple through and affect everything that happens in their core business. I think what we really need is we need brands building relationships with people, right? And people being advocates for brands. And fundamentally, the technology doesn't matter. It's just another tool that we use. If we don't line up those values of brands built on core values about doing good, and if we don't line up those values with people who clearly want that to be part of their life as well, technology doesn't matter. We will find a way, whether it's social technology, Twitter, Facebook, Foursquare, whatever it'll be, it's the nightclub effect. There will be new technology next week that makes that technology defunct. Mm-hmm. So we need to think about fundamentally building relationships, right, based upon those core values.
So it's sort of the small town community in a global fashion.
Yeah, definitely.
So we're going to actually take some questions from the audience because we're sort of getting close to that time. So anybody, are you all ready to ask some questions?
What I'm curious about is how do we motivate people to behave better?
Yeah.
Whether they're people who have power because of government, people who have power because of their business situation, or consumers.
Yeah.
What motivates them? And my fear is that it's all about money.
I think behavior change is a really gnarly subject. It's one that we deal with our clients on a lot of different levels. One of the key examples for me, we do a lot of work in the pharma industry and thinking about behavior change with regards to drug adherence. And how do you make sure, I think it's something ridiculous like in the like 30 to 40% of people who will be on a prescription that will make them better aren't taking it, right? Because of a number of factors. And we've developed this framework that starts to look at, 3 stages to design for behavior change. You've got to believe, right? That you got to build that belief that you know you can do better, right? Fundamentally, if you can't instigate that feeling in someone's minds that they can do better than they are today, and that comes a lot to do with data and feedback and different channels through which we can provide them the feedback to know what's right. You got to provide stimuli to inform and educate people to know what their choices are. Right? We're doing a lot of work right now with the government around comparative effectiveness research, where we're trying to provide choice options at point of care to allow patients to provide, to take the right options and actually end up with better patient outcomes. And then you've got to provide those stimuli, those experiences that you talked about, to allow people to act, right? sticky experiences, things that are enjoyable, things that are delightful, and that thing becomes a big loop, like going between believe in yourself, believe in the change, know what to do about it, know what my options are, and have the experiences I want to act upon. You have to try and change that loop, and it all comes down to feedback and data, and if you're not measuring it, and if you're not providing it to people, they fundamentally can't make the change.
And just to kind of